Penny Parker has hit Marvel Snap with a bang, or should I say, with an impact. Third impact, perhaps. Everyone's favorite walking Evangelion reference has been getting in the robot for about 12 to 14 hours now at the time of recording. This is a card that has incredible ability to synergize with a variety of different strategies, but on day one place that she has distinguished herself is in Wiccan decks. Because she is a 2/3 that gives you a 3-drop, she is on her own a solution to every non-Quicksilver problem that Wiccan decks can have. Playing Quicksilver into Penny Parker means that you have an active Wiccan on turn 4, barring energy shenanigans every single time. She is the best 2-drop, in my opinion, for every single Wiccan deck. If you like playing Wiccan decks, she solves so many problems just by existing. She raises the floor of these decks tremendously because it's not like you're going out of your way for anything. You're just getting it for free because she's already pretty damn good. This is to say nothing of the fact that when she merges, you get extra energy. This makes her a little bit of a lord, a merge lord in some senses, which means you can see her being played with cards like Agony, her being played with cards like Hulkbuster, and that kind of strategy is unique to this card. So not only does she fit in a very established archetype, and to me is clearly the best at her slot in that archetype, there's also still a lot to explore about her other synergies as a merge lord or as a card that can go in a variety of decks that stack power up and double up on things like that. She's a very powerful card at 2/3 with the ability to create a spider who is a 3/3 that merges with whatever and gives it the ability to move. If it merges with Penny, you get the energy. If it merges with something else, you get the thing that can move. Extremely strong card in straightforward Wiccan decks, undeniably at this point. However, the real question for her potential lies in what other decks she's going to enable and if it is worth investing in her as a Merge Lord. I love Devil Dinosaur, and it has been a long time since Devil Dinosaur was anything close to a meta-relevant threat. Or maybe that's the wrong way to say it. Devil Dinosaur has always been close, but it hasn't been able to knock the other cards that it competes with out of the decks that they're in. Penny Parker has some additional synergy here. It's not just that she adds a card to your hand and you're very happy to do that in your Wiccan Devil Dinosaur deck. It's also that she is a card that can ramp you to 5 energy. So you can go Penny Parker, Spider the Penny, play Devil Dinosaur on 4, Mystique it on 5, and then suddenly you're really getting crazy with stuff. This line of play is also relevant in all the other decks that are doing things like this, but especially relevant here because the same thing applies. You can delay, wait a turn, and use Penny Parker on turn 4 with the Spider in order to have 6 energy on turn 5 and play a Gore out so you can Mystique that. So in a deck like this, she's doing double duty. She's not just an excellent card for the purposes of things like this in terms of Wiccan curving out. She's an excellent card in terms of how she fits with the Dino plan because she adds cards to hand, and in terms of how she makes Mystique more consistent because now it's not just Wiccan that can enable you to play Dino Mystique and Gore Mystique. You have another option to actually try to get there. It's not as good. Obviously, you'd prefer to Wiccan, but having the actual option to not have these dead-ass cards in your deck is really important. One of the big weaknesses of Mystique type stuff is just how much of a brick she is if you can't actually get her to do stuff. And having more ways to give her good targets to copy, which Penny Parker adds, is a unique thing that this card brings that nothing else brings in this kind of deck. Now, this is not the only Wiccan deck that we're going to be talking about today. There's a lot of Wiccan decks to cover. I don't want you to think you need to craft cards for any one of these specific Wiccan decks. To me, I view them all as roughly equivalent. What we'll be doing today is alternating between Wiccan decks and non-Wiccan decks so you can see the stock stuff that she definitely goes in, and then some more unique and interesting brews. Jimmy Dickens cooked up this list that uses Ramp and Galacta and other merge cards as a way to create massive amounts of power on the board. This is a weird moment for the game because, and I don't really like what I'm about to say here, it's kind of a renaissance of Scarlet Spider. I have been playing more of this card, I've been seeing more of this card, and that bugs me because while it is cool that this card that previously sucked is going to get more homes because of things like Galacta and these merge cards, it sucks because I don't think a lot of people have this card. And that's a frustrating thing to do because I don't like doing videos where I do the video and then I read the comments and all the comments are cam. I can't make any of these decks. It sucks for me too. I want you to know that. That said, this is a really interesting deck. When I played against this list, the ability and the surprise that this deck can bring to bear, like a Scarlet Spider that can move, that is like double-digit power, is horrifying. That's a horrifying prospect to face. You have massive amounts of merge cards to go with your Penny, but you can also use your Spider on the Scarlet Spider. Spider here being SPDR. You can use it on the Scarlet Spider to give the ability to move. You can use it on any of your cards to give the ability to move. You don't have to use it on Penny. And so you just make these giant dudes, move them around. It's harder to Shang-Chi them, and then you copy them. And you have this immense ability to do vast power output in a way that the game isn't used to. This is not a deck people understand how to play against yet. I lost to this deck because I didn't understand how to play against it. And that's part of what makes a deck like this so dangerous so early. The value proposition is basically, you don't know that you have the best list. You don't know that this strategy will stand the test of time, but it is baseline very strong and weird and difficult to play around for sure. Especially because so many people are currently invested in building Penny Wiccan decks. A deck like this that can just go over the top of those decks, especially since a lot of them don't play Shadow King, is well positioned. Will it remain well positioned? I think that's up in the air. But the deck is strong right now, and Jimmy Dickens, I know, climbed like 200 SP with this stuff in high infinite. It is a legit powerhouse that does some really strong stuff. On to the next Wiccan list, which is an attempt at figuring out how much synergy you can add to Peni Parker. Basically, a lot of what this deck is trying to do is have hidden power, the ability to move your stuff around. You have Penny's Spider, you have Jeff, you have Nocturne. What I found was that ultimately, I think this was just a slight bit worse in terms of power output than the other Wiccan decks, but it does have a lot of play to it, and the way in which it approaches the game is something that I think a lot of people will enjoy. Problems in this deck include that it's very light on power because of the inclusion of Hydra Bob. Again, a lot of this deck is built to be a move your power around unpredictably kind of deck. Hydra Bob, very good with that, of course. And so when you have a list like this, where you sacrifice a 6-drop for a 1/5, it's a sacrifice. It's real. You're going to have a little bit less power output than other Wiccan decks in exchange for greater flexibility. Additionally, the inclusion of Galacta helps you to gain that flexibility even more than you already have it. That flexibility becomes bigger and bigger. You have 7 power stuff moving around rather than 4 power stuff. It is a force multiplier on that, and it also helps to give you some of that power back that you're otherwise losing not running a second 6-drop. The deck has some real legs, I think, and I think it's also probably the most budgetable of these. I think a lot more people probably have a card like Nocturne nowadays than they do Fenris Wolf or Scarlet Spider. And so I think there might be people who are happy to look at this and be like, oh, okay, this makes sense. If you're missing some of the big 3-drops in here, you can run things like Red Guardian. There's absolutely no problem with that. And if you're missing any of the 2s, feel free to replace with Cable or Mirage. A lot of the time, it will not be an issue. Dexter was playing this list all night, and I developed a fairly healthy respect for it because it's just very difficult to understand what it was actually doing. It took a while for me to realize there wasn't a Silver Surfer in here, and that'll happen for you too. People will play around Silver Surfers, and that'll be a horrifying thing for them, but this deck, more than anything else, to me, is actually a Galacta deck. What this deck is about is Galacta. Peni Parker is here because she's helpful, right? You are able to redistribute your power from Galacta. Obviously, you have a Peni Parker. You play Galacta on 4, and then you use your Spider on the Peni Parker. It gets to 9 power. You can move that around. You get extra energy. That's a really powerful turn 5 play. You have a lot of other things that are really strong in this deck, but I'll tell you, to be completely honest, the thing in this deck that beat the crap out of me was Scarlet Spider and Brood. Those are just some big ass dudes. Those guys get huge. Galacta Brood is obviously monstrous. And so what this deck has is just a truly asinine amount of points in a way that I don't think people are quite prepared for. If you look at all of these lists, I'm not playing any Shadow Kings. I barely saw any Shadow Kings. This is a very Shadow King, like, vulnerable deck, but people aren't playing it. They're playing Shang-Chi, but it's not all that vulnerable to Shang-Chi because Brood is going to be like, 15 power, 3 energy across multiple spaces, so it's not really Shangable. There's some merit to decks like this in a way that I think in any kind of normal quote-unquote metagame, there wouldn't be. But this kind of stuff with Galacta, with Peni Parker, has really gotten a boost. When I look at a deck like this, normally what I would expect to see is like, oh, that's a pile. It sucks. It's not going to be able to do anything. It's good. It does some stuff. Like, I was genuinely surprised at the quality of a deck that included a Koye, which is, I feel like that's a very unsurprising card. Normally when you see a Koye, you're like, I'm good. It's probably not that. It's not that good of a deck. This is pretty good. Next up is what I would consider probably the, like, baseline version of what this archetype looks like. If I had to guess, I would say this is probably the best Wiccan deck. It has the right combination of disruption and power. It has the right abilities to deal with a lot of different stuff. It has a bunch of really strong, really expensive cards. And that's kind of why I'm hesitant to be like, well, this is clearly the best one. Because it's like, okay, well, you need Fenriswolf, you need Gladiator, you need Redguard, you need a bunch of crap, right? And so this is a deck that I probably would say, of all the Wiccan decks on here, it is the one that has the slightest edge over the others. That's my opinion. I also think that that edge is not enough, or should not be enough, to sway you from playing one of the other lists to playing this one. I don't think they're far enough apart that it's worth 3,000 or 6,000 tokens. The basic thing I'd like to get across here is that Peni Parker is the best damn card for a Wiccan deck we've ever had. I was shocked at how awesome and amazing she felt every time I tried to play anything with Wiccan. You don't have to be fully invested in Peni Parker for her to make sense. She's just the best 2-drop for this archetype because of the text on her. It doesn't even really matter. And that is a really, really strong thing to have. I have wondered about maybe going back and investing further in, like, move stuff. The old Yo Woody move Wiccan deck is something that has been sitting in the back of my mind, but I haven't gotten around to testing it. I do think it has some potential, but until we reach that point, I strongly suspect that a deck that looks like this, that just has the right balance of proactive and reactive tech, is going to be the best way to play Peni Parker. Peni Parker can very reasonably go in Phoenix Force and provide something of a backup plan slash backup Hulkbuster slash, you kind of get what she's doing here, right? Like, this is the deck that does a bunch of merge stuff. You're happy to try to merge things. It's the deck that plays multiple man. You're happy to, like, merge onto that in the absence of anything else. I'm not positive that she ends up making the cut long term. I have not seen anything from her in this deck that has made me feel like she is a massive upgrade or a huge, huge bonus or required or anything like that. And I am reminded of when a card like, Aranya came out, and it was like, okay, clearly she goes in like PF and Destroy, and then she ended up just not really being a huge part of all of that. She's obviously in this list, but it's definitely like, if you bought her for that, you probably did get let down a bit, maybe? And I think that there is potential for that with Peni Parker here. I've seen plenty of people doing this. I haven't been blown away by it. I think it is potentially a card that can go in here, but not one that needs to go in here. That would be my day one read, is I don't think it has to, if you want to play PF, I don't think you have to have Peni Parker. But give it some time and see if she ends up raising the floor of the deck, because PF's ceiling has always been massive. And frankly, this is actually quite a good metagame for PF for many of the reasons we just talked about. There are a lot of Shang-Chis, not a lot of Shadow Kings. There's a lot of people playing Wiccan mid-range, so anything that goes over the top of that is positioned very well. PF is actually, I think, more viable right now than it is Peni making it viable. I think this is more about metagame context, because so many people are doing what I did and just jamming her in Wiccan, that a combo deck that can go over the top of that stuff is very well positioned. Next up is Rivals Team Up. Yes, we are back on the Wiccan lists. This is our 4th Wiccan list and the 7th in this video total. We're going to have one more non-Wiccan list after it, and this comes from my friend Dopest Body, who is currently, I believe, sitting in the top 20. And it is a unique list that leans into her nature, Peni Parker's nature, as a card that can ramp you into turn 5 from turn 3. So you have both Peni Parker and Luna Snow as ways of getting out 5-drops early. And this means that it's a little bit more 5-drop heavy, and this also means that you run into the number one thing I don't like about this deck, which is you're only running 3 2-drops. One of the things I really like about running 4 2-drops in Quicksilver Wiccan decks is that you always are, at worst, going to have a 50-50 on turn 2 to draw a 2-drop. Because if you have no 2-drops in your hand, 4 of them in your deck, and 8 total cards in your deck, that's what a 50-50 is. And I really enjoy that general safety. It is much more likely for you to get to your Wiccan when you have those 4 2-drops. I'm not saying it's a deal breaker here, because I think this deck has plenty of other ways to ramp. It compensates in unique ways. It needs Wiccan less. But it does come at an actual cost to the consistency of your Wiccan. That is notable, especially in a world where this kind of stuff can be damaging to your game plan. On the whole, this list has a lot of power in it, and being a list that is less reliant on Wiccan is naturally going to appeal to people. On the other hand, it runs Luna Snow, who is almost in the Scarlet Spider tier of cards I just don't think anyone other than me actually picked up. And so that means that it's a little bit less obtainable, and that is something that is unfortunate to me, in my opinion. Last but most certainly not least is Men! Exclamation point. It's a move deck that has been sort of circling around basically the high elo chat in my Discord for, I don't know, probably like 2 to 3 months, and everyone who talks about it, they call it Men! Exclamation point, because it's like a multiple man focused deck where you're like actually trying to invest in multiple man. And for the record, Peni Parker, extremely good at doing that. Having a multiple man that can move itself, I mean, we know how good that is from Phoenix Force, and she makes that happen just for existing. You get that to 6, you get to repeat that around. This deck has a lot of actual tempo in it. And of course, it is hooked up to what I would call the gravy train that is every other move card, right? Like, it's very difficult for a deck like this that runs Dagger and, you know, Human Torch and Vulture and Doctor Strange and Heimdall and Madam Web. It's hard for it to be bad. And I think this deck benefits from the fact that there is currently a little bit of a debate over what to do with the other stuff in a move deck like this. And so there really is some room in here, other than like the 7 or 8 cards that are in every move deck. It's really just like you're kind of messing around with the last 3 slots, right? The only cards that are like vastly different from this deck compared to like the other move deck is you don't have Cosmo, you have Peni Parker, you have Multiple Man, and you have Agony, and you're giving up like Cosmo, Craven, Cloak, basically. And so that means that you, like, those are the kind of cards that you're allowed to try to give up. And I think that's interesting. Like, this is a real adaptation. I don't know that it'll stick around. Having stuff like Cosmo, having Goliath, that stuff is really strong. But this has some real beef to it in a way that I think means that this could be a real sort of subgenre of the move archetype. It loses out on its relative invulnerability to things like Shang-Chi and Shadow King, which are very good against you, but we just talked over and over about how few people are actually playing, especially Shadow King. And so I think this does have some legs, especially right now. And I'm really interested to see where this sort of sub-variant of the move archetype goes from here. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember to like and subscribe. Let me know what you think about Peni Parker. My advice to you is that if you like Wiccan decks, you're going to want to pick her up. If you expect Wiccan decks to remain relevant in a world where Doom 2099 is coming out very, very shortly. As always, thank you so much. Please remember, like and subscribe. I'm KM Best, and you have been phenomenal.